Amber Heard is stepping back in the spotlight as the actress prepares to star in Jeremy O. Harris's new play, Spirit of the People, her first role since her legal showdown with ex-husband Johnny Depp.
You knew this one was coming. There's a reason this story still gets dragged out every time people talk about self-inflicted Hollywood disasters. And yeah, the memes didn't help. But the punchline wasn't the punchline. The move that really set the internet on fire was a decision printed in black and white. An op-ed that turned a quiet win into a very public war. She had the image, the roles, the runway. Then she lit the match herself and dared the wind to do the rest. This isn't about perfect people. It's about what happens when a celebrity tries to game a narrative in the age of receipts. For a while, it worked. Until the courtroom mic switched on, the clips went viral, and the crowd stopped clapping. So let's walk through the rise that never quite became stardom, the marriage that became a minefield, and the moment one op-ed turned momentum into shrapnel. Because sometimes the crash isn't an accident, it's a choice. Here's the part people forget. Amber Heard didn't fall from the A-list. She never fully got there. She had the look, the press, the franchises circling, but not the concrete foundation that lets you ride out a storm. In Austin, she was the kid on horseback, doing pageants, rolling her eyes at them later like they were beneath her. That "I'll define myself thanks" energy followed her to Los Angeles when she was 18. Bit parts, day players, the random friend number 2 that exits frame halfway through the second act. It's the standard path. The first hint of a breakout came from festival buzz around All the Boys Love Mandy Lane, the kind of slow burn attention that says, okay, there's heat here. Then came supporting slots that put her next to names people actually recognize. It wasn't the kind of heat that flips studio calendars, but it's how you get noticed. Not because you're carrying the thing, but because you didn't drop it when they tossed it to you. Momentum is a funny thing in Hollywood. It looks like inevitability from the outside and a treadmill from the inside. One year you're stacking small credits, the next year your team is whispering about positioning and packaging. She was doing the rounds. Genre pieces, glossy thrillers, the kind of mid-budget films that survive on posters and shoulders. A little notoriety crept in around the edges from a public incident with a girlfriend, which she later framed as being misunderstood. The town shrugged and kept moving. That's how it works. The machine doesn't care how perfect you are, it cares whether you fit inside the frame and finish your lines on time. And then the chemistry test that changed everything. The Rum Diary. Not because the movie rewired the culture, because of proximity. Proximity to real, bankable power. Johnny Depp was more than a bankable name. He was a franchise, a warm memory, a mood board. It matters when a studio thinks your name might show up attached to his, even if you never share the screen again. Suddenly, the pictures got bigger, the carpets got redder, the brands got bolder. The magazines said rising star and modern icon, and did that thing where they confuse a glow with a light source. None of that is a crime, it's the business. Fame doesn't always arrive because of performance. Sometimes it arrives because the camera likes how you stand next to someone the audience already loves. Marriage put the turbo on all of it. Now the scheduling calls hit different.
The Aquaman actress shared a rare glimpse into the rehearsal process on Instagram. Alongside a rehearsal selfie with Jeremy ahead of the production's world premiere in July, Amber adds the caption, quote, "In my theater era."
Now there are dream boards. Now the studio believes you are part of a larger world. That's how the superhero stuff happens. The blockbuster stuff. The glossy roles that function like passports. The town loves a beautiful couple. The town also loves a comeback, a scandal, and a story it can repeat on cue. And inside that halo, real life was cracking. The marriage was volatile. The kind of volatile where both people bring years of baggage. The kind people outside only understand in headlines. Then the fracture, divorce filings, a restraining order, headlines turned up to 11. she secured a settlement and publicly pledged it to charity, framed as "not about the money," a line that sounded clean and hit hard. It was the kind of line that slides into a press release, lands on a morning show, and becomes bigger than the person who said it. For a while, she wore that line like a medal. There's power in a narrative that says you walked away from dollars to stand on principle. There's also risk. If anyone ever checks the receipts, at that point, all she had to do was be quiet. This is the part that stings because the win was already banked. The public narrative tilted her way. The offers hadn't dried up. The culture rewarded the arc she was selling, and the industry wasn't in the mood to challenge it. A dignified silence could have turned into a clean slate. But silence doesn't come easy to people who describe themselves as brave truth tellers. The op-ed changed the weather. It read like a personal essay about speaking out, but it landed like a flare fired into a crowded theater. Have you ever watched somebody insist on having the last word, and then watched the last word turn into a long conversation they can't control? That's the op-ed. On paper, a victory lap. In practice, a legal tripwire. Johnny didn't do the standard celebrity dance. No vague statements, no carefully curated podcasts. He went to court. And when a story goes from public narrative to sworn testimony, everything slows down and sharpens. Words get defined. Timelines get measured. Pledges and donations stop being synonyms. Audio clips stop being rumors and start being evidence. A jury listens to the same sentence 100 times because meaning lives in tone, in pauses, in the way a person repeats themselves when they're trying to sell a feeling. The internet treated it like a series, and the series had seasons: discovery, testimony, cross-examination, verdict. The crowd that once clapped on cue started watching like accountants. Here's where it takes a left turn. Influencers, lawyers, body language hobbyists, they built channels around the trial in real time. Every clip got annotated, every inconsistency got collated. It wasn't just that the story didn't land, it was that the audience learned where to check. When a person says, "I pledged," and people think, "You mean you donated?" and then a lawyer asks which word you mean under oath, the room changes. The narrative that felt fog-proof suddenly had fog lights on it. And when you're playing the role of someone who's always right, the smallest correction makes you look wrong everywhere. Before anyone gets precious, none of this turns the other party into a saint. Johnny has his own catalog of chaos, and he's the first to admit it. People like him anyway. Decades of goodwill buys you a lot. Not everything, but a lot. He had characters people grew up with, characters that feel like summer. He also never tried to sell himself as flawless. He didn't have to. He was selling a myth and a shrug. She was selling perfection and a cause. The more a person performs perfection, the more the audience waits for the missed line. And every missed line started to sound like the whole script. The verdict didn't just cost money. It rewrote reputations. Studios are not churches. They don't absolve. They manage risk. The same people who gush about your dress drop you when your name starts to feel like a fire hazard.
The 39-year-old's return to acting comes 3 years after the actress and Johnny faced off in court after he accused her of defamation.
A shaved-down role here, a release date wobble there. Suddenly, "We love her, we're excited for what's next," turns into scheduling conflicts and creative direction shift. The machine moves on because the machine is always moving. When people say Hollywood turned on her, they miss the point. Hollywood didn't turn. Hollywood flowed around an obstacle. There's a cruel physics to celebrity. Likability is currency, and you can't buy it directly. Johnny's was earned over years of being weird, charming, messy, and magnetic. Sex, 0.05. Hers was earned over months of looking like the person people expected to see standing next to him, and saying the right things at the right microphones. Those are different currencies. One survives a storm, the other washes off with the makeup. So what's left? For a while, she tried Europe, new city, new language, the appealing distance of a different alphabet. That's a move a lot of people make after a public bruise. It reads as reinvention, as exile, as both. It also reads as escape. which is not quite the same thing as change. One or two festival projects flickered into the press, the kind of releases that come and go without tearing a hole in anything. The question nobody can answer for her is the only one that matters. What do you build when the crowd doesn't show? If the brand was forward motion and champagne flash, what's the brand when it's just Tuesday? Wait till you hear this, because this is the part nobody wants to admit. If she had simply stopped at the settlement and the public pledge, the story probably would have softened with time. People forget faster than they forgive, and forgetting is enough to get work. But the op-ed forced a legal conversation, and the legal conversation demanded definitions, and the definitions didn't match the press releases. Once the audience saw how the sausage was made, they didn't want to eat at that restaurant anymore. That's not sexism, that's consumer behavior. The moment you look like a product that doesn't work as advertised, the market moves on. There's a template for surviving a public implosion. It usually includes disappearing for a year, making something small and excellent, apologizing without self-mythology, and letting other people decide if they miss you. It almost never includes doubling down. When you've been accused of weaponizing a narrative, any attempt to weaponize a new one just confirms the worst read of you. That's the trap. When you build a persona around "I'm brave because I speak out," even silence becomes performative, and the audience keeps watching for the next speech. The only thing that breaks that loop is humility, which can't be faked. The internet smells it.
And after being a hot topic of public opinion for the 6-week duration of the trial, where she was found liable for defaming the actor, she wanted nothing more than to focus on her family, including daughter Una Page and newborn twins Ocean and Agnes.
The internet also smells when you pretend to have it. Here's a softer truth. It is possible to be hurt and harmful at the same time. It's possible to be a victim in moments and a villain in others. Adult relationships are messier than memes, and the worst fights are the ones nobody sees. But courtrooms are not therapy rooms. They're scoreboards. And when you drag a story into that space, you're not asking to be understood, you're asking to be believed. That's a different standard. Sympathy gets quiet when specifics don't add up. People still bring up the bed story because it's simple. It's a cartoon. It makes complex pain into a punchline. But the real joke wasn't the joke. The real joke was the confidence of believing the narrative could float forever without ballast. When the internet flipped, it didn't flip because of one gross detail. It flipped because 1,000 little details bent the same direction. That's how trust breaks, one hairline crack at a time until the glass gives way and you can't remember where the first line even was. Most folks remember the verdict. What they forget is the timing. The culture that crowned her in 2017 wasn't the culture reading transcripts in 2022. The pendulum had swung. People were exhausted by capital letter movements and celebrities who auditioned for martyrdom on daytime TV. The audience didn't want a sermon, they wanted a story that wasn't insulting. When they didn't get it, they chose the person who made them laugh in high school and told them he was flawed from the jump. That's not justice, that's show business. One last detail flips it. Look at how the industry reacted to the idea of Johnny returning to his most famous role. The concept alone moved headlines even if the deal points floated in rumor. That's gravitational pull. Compare that with the vacuum around her name. No magnetism, no rumor, no what if. That's not because one person is good and the other is bad. It's because one person has characters people miss and the other has an image people don't. You can rehab an image. You can't invent nostalgia. So where does it go from here? If she wants a second act, it won't come from telling the same story louder. It'll come from showing up small somewhere nobody expects, doing work that doesn't depend on the old magic tricks, and letting the work speak. It will also require making peace with the fact that some doors don't reopen. That's not unfair. That's life. The executives moved on because moving on is their job. The fans moved on because the internet never stops refreshing. If you want them to stop scrolling, you have to give them a reason that outruns the last headline they remember about you. There's a lesson for everybody who loves attention more than craft.
Telling Savannah Guthrie during an interview with Today back in 2022, "I'm going to be a full-time mom where I'm not having to juggle calls with lawyers."
Fame is not armor. Fame is accelerant. It makes the wins explode and the failures uninhabitable. It's great until you need shade. The people who survive know the difference between owning a moment and owning a skill. They know that a magazine cover can't help you when a lawyer asks what you meant by a word you used 3 years ago. They know that you can't believe me your way through a cross-examination. And they know that the audience isn't cruel, the audience is busy. Give them a reason to like you or they're gone. Give them a reason not to trust you, and they'll tell their friends. If you strip the names off and just look at the beats, this story is old. A beautiful person skates on image until they slip on details. A famous person mistakes sympathy for love. A winning hand gets overplayed because the thrill of being right felt better than the safety of being quiet. People always think the culture changed on them. Most of the time, the culture simply stopped clapping. The same microphones that magnify your victory will magnify your loss. Same volume, different song. It's tempting to end on the cruelty of it. One of the most spectacular crashes, people say, and honestly, well deserved. But there's a colder read that cuts deeper. The crash wasn't spectacular, the illusion was. The industry built a tower of mirrors and invited her to live inside. When the lights moved, the mirrors went dark. That's not a tragedy. That's a reset. The person who comes out the other side has to decide whether to build something with walls and windows this time, or keep searching for new mirrors in new rooms. Reinvention is possible. It just won't look like the old photos. So what do we do with it? We can laugh at the memes, sure. We can quote lines from testimony and pretend we would have stood stronger under that kind of scrutiny. Or we can admit the obvious. Everybody's PR is a product, and products have warranties until they don't. The audience is the warranty department. They'll take a return if you're honest and the defect isn't fatal. They won't if you argue with the terms and conditions you wrote yourself. That's the quiet truth underneath the loud headlines. The internet will keep dragging this one back up because it's neat. A rise, a choice, a fall, a lesson. But if you're listening closely, the lesson isn't never speak up. The lesson is don't mistake a narrative for a net. If your story only works when nobody asks follow-ups, it's not a story, it's a slogan. The people who last don't need slogans. They have scenes, they have songs. They have something you can hold that doesn't melt in your hand. In the end, the op-ed wasn't a message to the world. It was a dare to the facts. The facts accepted. The courtroom did what courtrooms do. The public did what the public does. The industry did what the industry always does. And here we are, counting the cost.
And asked her what she might tell her kids about what unfolded in the courtroom, Amber explained, "I think no matter what, it will mean something. I did the right thing. I did everything I could do to stand up for myself and the truth."
For a few years, she really did have it all, or at least the version of all that looks good in a carousel post. Then she tried to turn the moment into a movement, and found out movements don't carry you if you can't carry yourself. The crash wasn't glorious. It was quiet. You only heard it if you were listening for the pop of a bubble finally giving way. If there's a future chapter, it won't start with a press release. It will start with work. Something built, not borrowed. Something small enough to live inside and strong enough to survive a storm. It will start with owning words that can be measured and facts that don't get wobbly under oath. It will start with the kind of humility that doesn't come with an audience. Maybe that's too tall an order. Maybe it isn't. Either way, the market already priced the risk. The rest is up to the person who created the risk in the first place. So yeah, crash and burn. A better headline might be crash and learn, but that requires the kind of quiet that doesn't test well. For now, this is what we've got. A cautionary tale dressed like a celebrity profile. A reminder that power you didn't build will never save you. A study in how fast a wave can turn when it realizes you were surfing on someone else's wake the whole time. If that sounds harsh, consider the alternative. Softening it until it feels comfortable enough to repeat. Comfort is how you get into this kind of trouble in the first place. People will keep asking whether Hollywood will take her back. Hollywood didn't throw her out. It just stopped calling. It calls when it needs you. It needs you when you make it money. The fastest way back isn't a speech. It's a scene that gets quiet people talking again. If she finds that, there's a lane. If she doesn't, there's Europe and a different name on a mailbox. Both are outcomes. One is a career. The other is a story you tell friends when you're nostalgic for that time the cameras followed you across a carpet like the floor was made of light. And that's the real ending here. Not the verdict, not the memes, not the bed joke that will outlive arguments about context. The ending is the moment you realize a culture that once moved to your rhythm has moved on. You can chase it, you can fight it, or you can build something that doesn't need it. That choice is waiting. It always was. The op-ed chose the crowd. The court chose the facts. Now the person has to choose the work. If she ever does, maybe we'll be back here, talking about a small film that punched above its weight and surprised everyone by being good. If she doesn't, we'll close the tab like we always do and let the algorithm recommend the next spectacular story about a beautiful person who thought attention was the same thing as truth. That's the show. Keep the lesson, leave the spectacle, and remember, the internet is not a jury until you invite it to be one. Then it is the only jury that matters, and it never dismisses.